what are arguably the two greatest superhero movies ever, and yet also two of the most dissimilar superhero movies ever. It's the light, corny fun of Sam Raimi's Spider-Man 2 versus the dark and gritty realism of Christopher Nolan's The Dark Knight.
You know, you remind me of my father. I hated my father.
Pretty strong argument for birth control.
Spider-Man 2 has Alfred Molina as Dr. Octopus, a rather shocking casting choice. Everyone was expecting a big name to take this role, but until this movie, Molina was best known for his role in Raiders of the Lost Ark. Do you remember him in that movie?
Whew, I did not see that coming.
Dr. Octopus is a great villain for this movie. I say this despite the fact that he ticks one of the big lame villain qualifiers. He's insane. The insane villain is so easy. He doesn't need motivation, just make him crazy. There's a bit more here though. We see early on how well Peter and Otto get along. They are both scientists. Otto has thrown his life into his work and he pays for it. His dedication and failure not only destroys his career and permanently mutilates him, but also takes the life of his wife. Unwilling to accept his failure, he puts all of his energy into proving his experiment works, and in the end it cost him his own life. Dr. Octopus is a great villain to reflect the struggles of Peter Parker, which will be discussed in the Heroes section. In any other comparison, Dr. Octopus would be an easy winner. But now we get to Heath Ledger's Joker. Not just one of the best comic book movie villains of all time, one of the best villains of all time, period.
Those mob fools want you gone so they can get back to the way things were. But I know the truth. There's no going back. You've changed things.
Then why do you want to kill me?
I don't want to kill you. What would I do without you?
This Joker is a direct result of the introduction of Batman to Gotham. He exists almost as if destined to counter Batman. Batman seeks order, Joker seeks chaos. Batman wants to inspire people to do better. The Joker wants to show that everyone is capable of being the villain. I can talk about how Dr. Octopus reflects what will happen to Peter Parker if he becomes too focused on just being Spider-Man, but the Joker is a reflection of Batman. Perhaps the better word is reaction. He exists solely to ensure that Batman fails. Add to it, Heath Ledger is just insanely good in this role. It's doubtful we'll ever have a Joker this good ever again. Point for DC.
Let her go.
Very poor choice of words.
In The Dark Knight, we have Christian Bale's Batman, a man who has become thoroughly obsessed with his superhero persona.
Know your limits, Master Wayne.
Batman has no limits.
Well, you do, sir.
Well, can't afford to know him.
He has to deal with what that persona means to the city. He not only has to deal with the new class of villains that Batman has inspired, but the new class of copycat heroes that wants to help Batman. Normal people who want to bring down villains and are putting themselves in an incredible amount of risk to do this, which actually hurts Batman's goal, which is to protect people. Sadly, the idea that people are risking themselves to help Batman doesn't play a huge role in this movie, and is pretty much looked over with a quick joke.
What gives you the right? What's the difference between you and me?
I'm not wearing hockey pads.
We see the copycats at the beginning, and the Joker kills one later, and that's it. Batman's only real story seems to be whether or not he can trust Harvey Dent to bring down crime, and perhaps make a city that doesn't need Batman, and maybe he can retire. Bruce Wayne doesn't actually have any arc here, which is interesting. He starts as a guy who thinks Batman can make a difference, goes through some shit, and ends up as a guy who thinks Batman can make a difference. Batman is not the most interesting character in this movie. In fact, he's probably a distant third behind the Joker and Harvey Dent. Tobey Maguire's Peter Parker in Spider-Man 2, a hero who cannot make his life work. He is failing his classes. He cannot hold down a job. He cannot give the girl he likes despite her practically throwing herself at him. He cannot pay his bills. His aunt cannot pay her bills. The newspaper he freelances for is writing hit pieces about Spider-Man. He cannot win. Literally, if something can go against him, it will. Add to it, he is losing his powers. It forces him to consider that perhaps he needs to put Spider-Man behind him. He is putting Spider-Man as the priority in his life, and everything else is suffering because of it. Add to it, he sees firsthand what happens when you let one part of your life take too much dominance with Otto Octavius. He lost everything. When Peter starts losing his powers, it almost makes sense for him to decide maybe not only would his life be better, but perhaps the world would be better if he hung up the costume. After all, hasn't he done enough good for one lifetime? Peter Parker is the key to why this movie works so well. Tobey Maguire is definitely not the best Spider-Man. That credit goes to either Andrew Garfield or Tom Holland. But as far as the best Peter Parker, no one else competes. It would be easy to get annoyed with Peter for hanging up the suit. After all, we know it's not going to last. This is a superhero franchise after all, but instead we sympathize. We see his plight, and we want him to have what he wants too. Peter once again goes through the hero's journey in this movie, right down to the call of action that he refuses. We see him walk away and refuse the call, but we see this is taking its toll on him. That's what makes this movie so strong. Peter's life really seems to be coming together, yet he is still not satisfied. When people are trapped in a burning building, he finds he cannot stand around. He has to help. Afterwards, the firefighters call him a hero, and we soon learn that not everyone was saved.
You got some guts, kid.
Some poor soul got trapped on the 4th floor. Never made it out.
They may think Peter is a hero, but Peter knows he could have done more. Spider-Man 2 isn't about responsibility like the first movie. It's about choice. It's about coming to grips with who you are. He could have the life he wants, do well in school, hold down a job, get the girl he's had a crush on forever. When everything happens and the cards are laid on the table, Peter chooses to help others rather than have a life with the things he wants. He chooses others over himself. Spider-Man 2 isn't about how Spider-Man is a hero. It's about how Peter Parker is a hero. You can make similar arguments about Peter Parker not really having an arc here. He starts as Spider-Man and ends as Spider-Man, but he actually has a fairly big arc. In the beginning, he was Spider-Man out of guilt for what happened to Uncle Ben. He felt obliged to use his powers for good. In the end, he is Spider-Man not out of any obligation, but because he chooses to be. This is a point for Marvel.
Pizza time.
Spider-Man 2 has Kirsten Dunst as Mary Jane Watson, James Franco as Harry Osborn, Rosemary Harris as Aunt May, and J.K. Simmons as J. Jonah Jameson. The cast here is amazing. You could argue that Dunst is wasted, and she largely is in these movies, but she maybe has a bit more here. We see her constantly trying to get through to Peter, and not understanding why he constantly seems interested yet rejects her. Franco, in many ways, functions as a secondary villain. His obsession with Spider-Man has taken over his life, especially once Octavius' experiment fails. They are good, but the real standouts here are Simmons and Harris. And while Simmons is at his peak Jameson in this movie,
Could you pay me in advance?
You serious?
given even a moment where just perhaps he misses Spider-Man.
Spider-Man was a hero. I just couldn't see it. He was a thief!
It's Harris that dominates the supporting cast here. Her outburst when Peter tries to refuse her money.
You need it more than I do.
No, I can't take that.
Yes, you can. You can take this money from me. For God's sake, it's not much. Now take it.
It's clear she is a woman at the end of her rope trying desperately to, at the very least, maintain the illusion of having everything together. Then, her wordless reaction to Peter's confession.
I've tried to tell you so many times.
All this culminates in her hero speech to Peter that might as well also contain a neon sign that says, "I know you're Spider-Man."
I believe there's a hero in all of us that keeps us honest, gives us strength, makes us noble.
In The Dark Knight, we have Maggie Gyllenhaal as Rachel Dawes, Aaron Eckhart as Harvey Dent, Gary Oldman as Jim Gordon, Michael Caine as Alfred Pennyworth, and Morgan Freeman as Lucius Fox. So both these movies have devastatingly good supporting cast. Heck, look at the characters I didn't even bring up. Maroni, Robbie Robertson, Dalton, Scarecrow, Dr. Kirk Connors, Mike Engel, and John Jameson. Many of these characters get more development in these movies than many major characters in other movies. That's really how amazingly genuinely good these movies are. Rachel still has feelings for Bruce, but has moved on to Harvey Dent and doesn't know how to tell Bruce that she wants him to move on from Batman, but she will no longer be there for him when he does. Harvey Dent is a secondary hero for most of the movie, and at the very end, for a brief period, he becomes the main villain. That evolution is completely believable. Alfred gets his traditional exposition stories, but he tells them so well.
Some men aren't looking for anything logical, like Mullet. Some men just want to watch the world burn.
Jim Gordon and Lucius Fox get to play their roles in the story, with Gordon's death being a ruse to capture the Joker, while Fox, unbeknownst to him, helps develop a sonar that can be used to find the Joker. All the supporting characters in The Dark Knight are stronger than Mary Jane and Harry Osborn, and none of them are stronger than Jameson and Aunt May. So the question is, are they all together strong enough to be the better supporting cast overall? The answer has to be yes. The Dark Knight has a much bigger supporting cast and balances them so well, giving them all moments to shine and giving DC the point.
Flip a coin to see who leads?
It's my father's lucky coin. As I recall, it got me my first date with you.
I wouldn't leave something like that up to chance.
I don't.
Christopher Nolan clearly heard the criticism about how Batman Begins had sloppy, quick-cut action. In The Dark Knight, the action is much more clear. It does this by mainly relying on medium shots and maintaining longer takes to get as much of the action in a single shot as possible. It can get a bit sloppy, but overall it's way more coherent than its predecessor. That being said, it also lacks any real creativity. Nolan isn't the best visual director, but he does try, and it feels like when the action starts, he stops trying to be creative at all and just does all he can to keep the action in the shot. It's understandable. Better to be plain and clear than creative and messy. In Spider-Man 2, the action manages to be both creative and clear. Sam Raimi is a much more visual director than Nolan, and comparing these two movies, you can see a real difference in the action. The bank heist, the burning building, the final battle, all memorable and look fantastic. All three of those alone are better than the action in The Dark Knight. But then we get the train scene, perhaps the best scene in any superhero movie. The train is so effective. It's fast moving, so a slight misstep could mean doom to the hero. And then there's a group of hostages that are trapped and can't flee the area. This comes into play when Spider-Man must stop the train, a feat that Spider-Man's powers alone will not do. Peter Parker must use his intelligence to figure out the best use of his powers to stop this catastrophe, and it almost kills him. The Dark Knight shows Nolan improving, but this is very much a point for Marvel.
You have a train to catch.
The visual palettes for these movies couldn't be more different. The Dark Knight has a dark tone, while Spider-Man 2 is bright and sunny. The Dark Knight gives us what is easily the most disturbing looking Joker on film. Nolan also leans heavily on practical effects, giving everything a very real quality. That real world quality also hurts it a bit. The Batman costume this time is customized for functionality and also looks completely nowhere. Spider-Man 2 had almost seamless computer effects at the time, and now they haven't aged too well. The bit where Dr. Octopus is sinking still holds up, but everything else isn't so strong. However, whenever possible, Dr. Octopus did have practical mechanical arms, and they look great in every shot. Spider-Man has the same suit he did in the last movie, but when your suit looks that good, why change a good thing? This is really close, but I have to give an edge to Spider-Man 2 because of the camera work. It has Raimi style all over it, and works great in this universe created for Spider-Man. Nolan's more standard camera work has its moments, but mostly just sticks to normal shots with minimal creativity, depending strictly on the action or dialogue to tell the story. This is a point for Marvel.
Look out!
Sound design is fairly equal in both these movies. The best thing has to be Dr. Octopus's arms and how the noise of the arms is used frequently to give the arms emotions, which is very creative.
Listen to me now. Listen to me now.
That leaves us with the scores. Both are fantastic. Hans Zimmer is the reverse of Christian Bale in these movies. Christian Bale's performance as Batman literally gets worse in each movie.
If anyone saw this, everything would be undone. All the criminals you pulled off the streets would be released.
Hans Zimmer's score literally gets better with each movie. Danny Elfman's Spider-Man 2 score is good, but a lot of the score actually reminds me of his work from the Batman movies. This is another close one, but shocking, I know. Zimmer wins this one. Point for DC. It all comes down to story, and once again, these movies take drastically different approaches to their story. Both are about what happens to a superhero after they've been a hero for a while. However, Spider-Man 2 is all about how the hero lifestyle makes Peter's life very difficult, while The Dark Knight is all about how being a hero influences the world around that hero. One thing I have to talk about that drives me nuts: the bullet fingerprint that Batman pulls from the wall. It's complete and utter nonsense. He somehow replicates the bullet fragment that occurred originally and reconstructs the bullet to get a fingerprint from that. It would be more believable if he tore the wall apart and put the bullet together by hand. Of course, if he did it by hand, it would also wipe the fingerprint off the bullet. But so would, I don't know, maybe firing the bullet through the wall? That is something that has always bugged me.
It just raises too many questions.
But back to the core of the stories. The Dark Knight is about Batman's impact on the world, but we largely follow the characters he's impacted. Harvey Dent and the Joker, the major characters inspired by Batman to do more. They are also far more interesting characters than Batman himself. Then we get to Batman spying on the citizens of Gotham to get the Joker. You can argue that since it was only used once, that this is alright, and that's clearly what this movie wants to go with. But this is such a huge issue that brushing it aside so nonchalantly is just wrong. Batman or anybody spying on innocent people just to get one bad guy is wrong. Pure and simple. Yet The Dark Knight drops this huge social issue in the audience's lap, has Lucius state his outrage at it.
You took my sonar concept and applied it to every phone in the city. With half the city feeding you sonar, you can image all of Gotham. This is wrong.
Which is essentially just lip service. Then he uses it. Even though it's just used once, it's wrong. It's wrong for Amazon to do it, it's wrong for Google to do it, and it's wrong for Batman to do it.
Oh, hi, Danny.
Awesome. Alexa, play rock music.
Okay.
But hell, it looks cool, so why not? In Spider-Man 2, the focus is always on Peter. This is his story more than anyone else, and he is the driving force behind it. It's all about choice. In fact, the whole movie is the result of three characters' choices: Peter Parker, Otto Octavius, and Harry Osborn. These three characters each decide to choose what they want first. Otto chooses to push through with his experiment even though told to discontinue just to prove it works.
What are you doing? Pulling the plug!
Then Harry chooses to continue onward with his hate of Spider-Man after the experiment fails and after Spider-Man saved his life.
I have nothing left except Spider-Man.
He saved your life, sir.
He humiliated me by touching me.
Finally, the last problematic choice is Peter Parker when he hangs up his suit. Then, in reverse order, is Peter first realizes his mistake and learns that he cannot not be Spider-Man and stand by while people are harmed when he could save them. Then, he teaches this to Harry.
There are bigger things happening here than me and you. Harry, please, I've got to stop him.
That his revenge isn't more important than the people of the city. Then, finally, to Octavius.
Sometimes, to do what's right, we have to be steady and give up the thing we want the most, even our dreams.
Each of these characters first made the choice to do what they wanted, and things spiral out of control. Only later, when they decide to do what's right, do things get better. Sure, Harry does eventually reverse his choice.
Avenge me! No!
But for a little bit, he was done with revenge. An issue brought up a lot with this movie is how Spider-Man punches Dr. Octopus and yet doesn't cripple him when he has super strength and Oct is just a guy with metal arms. Honestly, doesn't bug me because this universe has a lot of crazy stuff, but there is validity to this complaint. Also, how Dr. Octopus throws a car at Peter Parker. Only way he survives is by being Spider-Man, and since Dr. Octopus wants information from him, seems like a bad way to introduce herself. Still, even with these faults, Spider-Man 2 is all about choice, and it hits this point really well. Batman seems to want to do things, but never really does. He almost turns himself in. He tries to retire and let Harvey Dent be the legal person who can take over for him. He does inspire people to largely do good in this movie, and that should be said. But as far as what he does in this movie, it's largely nowhere. The only thing he successfully does is take the heat for Harvey Dent's crimes, which actually makes sense. He doesn't want other people being vigilantes like him, so a good way to slow that down is to tarnish his name. This is incredibly close again, but Spider-Man 2 hit more of what it was aiming for. The Dark Knight honestly doesn't seem very sure what to do with Batman throughout the movie, other than have him fight people and spy on Gotham. It also brings up pretty heavy issues and kind of just hand waves them away. It definitely knows what to do with Joker and Harvey Dent. Harvey Dent is a very fascinating character, and seeing his fall is the stuff of great tragedies. The Joker is just stunning in this movie. He is brilliant and terrifying. However, the movie is called The Dark Knight, and it does a good job of showing us Batman's impact on the world, but it also fails to actually give us an interesting Batman. Final point and win for Marvel. Looking at the numbers, I know I'll get a lot of hate. I honestly wasn't sure how a lot of these categories would break down going into this. The only ones I knew off the top of my head would be easy, are hero and villain. The rest required I decide as I broke them down, and this is where it ended up, and looking over it, it seems reasonable. An interesting thing to notice when examining these two movies, Spider-Man 2 very much focused on the hero, while also maintaining a lighthearted tone, while still having some heavy emotional moments. Sounds a lot like an MCU movie, doesn't it? Nolan wanted The Dark Knight to be as realistic as possible. What would Batman be like if he were real? Less a concern on lighthearted moments and more focus on how this may work in the world we know and the impact a hero would have on that world, much like how the DCEU started. You can see which one is more repeatable too. Doing stories about the hero finding themselves can work for pretty much every hero. Doing a story about heroes dealing with the villains inspired by that hero and dealing with the real world ramifications of that hero coming into prominence, that can get a bit redundant real fast if you don't progress it. You end up with a Superman situation where he never really develops in Man of Steel, and essentially we get the same underdeveloped character in Batman v Superman struggling and failing to develop there. Still, on their own, Spider-Man 2 and The Dark Knight are perhaps the two best superhero movies ever, if you don't count Howard the Duck, of course.
They think order and chaos are somehow opposites and try to control what won't be.